I'm going to go over all the hard work marketing's put into our projects for last year, calling attention specifically to where our time was spent, and then looking at some year-over-year comparisons. And then towards the end of the presentation, also reviewing operational targets and upcoming initiatives for this year. So let's just dig right in. First, I always like to review the portfolio level metrics. And as most of you already know, all of our projects within marketing are classified in one of two ways. That's either direct revenue or support project. So if it's classified as direct revenue, that just means that the project that we're working on is intended to bring money to the enterprise. That's where we like to spend the majority of our time and our resources. So for 2022, we completed over 5,500 projects, 67% of which were revenue generating. Our goal is to remain above 65% in the direct revenue category. So comparing that year over year, we did roughly 420 more projects than last year, which equates to an increase of about 8% growth in project volume year over year. We also jumped from 62% of revenue generating projects to 67%. So that quantity increase that we're seeing here is about a 17% jump in the quantity of direct revenue projects as well. So we also like to look at the channel distribution breakdown for each of these projects. So the blue here again is the direct revenue, up here in the gray is the support projects. So looking at the print channel, we completed 67% of our projects that we completed were print. 30% of those projects were digital, and then 3% were social. And looking at year over year, the distribution percentages remained relatively constant. There's a slight uptick in digital cases that we did over 2021. But all of the direct revenue actual quantity counts of projects went up. So while the distribution remained relatively the same, our project count did increase the sheer volume. So not only, just wrapping this slide up, not only did we do more projects overall, but those additional projects, that increase was attributed mostly in the direct revenue category. So we know that just the volume of the projects only tells one part of the story. It doesn't tell everything. So we also like to look at hours that are attributed to each of those projects and where those hours are going. So last year, we attributed 44,000 hours to all of our projects. So if you remember from the last slide, 67% of our direct revenue projects, quantity-wise, is what we spent the distribution, but 81% of our time actually was going to only that 67% of those projects. So we're actually spending more time in those direct revenue arenas than support, which is good. So we're looking at year over year. So we're seeing that number increase as well. So not only is our project count increasing, the distribution of those direct revenue projects, but also those hours logged for the direct revenue. So looking at another layer deeper, we also like to look at the channel and where those hours are attributed as well. So the smaller inner circle is the hours attributed by channel. So here are our print hours, our digital hours, and our social hours. So historically, we don't track our hours as much as we'd like to, which is one of the advantages of having our marketing department vertically integrated. But we have improved those numbers year over year, and that's another thing we're looking to get better at with the upcoming year. But I'd like to point out that the uptick in hours that we've logged is not a result of increased headcount, but actually our headcounts actually decreased. It relates to our full-time equivalents. And if you're unclear of the distinction between headcount and full-time equivalents or FTEs, headcount refers to the actual number of people, where FTE refers to basically the number of full-time hours people are working. So if you take me for an example, I myself am one headcount. If I work 40 hours a week, I'm also equivalent to one FTE. If I work 60 hours a week, then I'm equivalent. I'm working the same hours as 1.5 people. So the FTB would be 1.5. Hopefully nobody's working that many hours. So another way we like to look at things is by our different product categories. So not all of our projects have products or brands, but for the ones that we do, we'll identify those within the project so that we can parse that out and report on it later. And then they also can belong to multiple categories and brands. So we could have restorative and clinical education, could have, implants and restorative and preventive together if we're lumping in a bite splint. So these aren't a one-to-one ratio with the number of projects that we're completing. But for here, I'm going to parse out the product categories and we'll look at the hours associated to each of those product categories year over year as well. So for 2022, restorative made up 24% of the projects that we completed in terms of volume. And the rest of these essentially are the same size. There's only 130 projects that are separating implants from clinical education here. But when we jump right here, there's over 570 projects. So these are relatively the same in terms of project count. And then comparing that year over year, we want to remember that we completed about 420 more projects in 2022 versus 2021. The only product category that we saw a decrease in quantity was restorative. So year over year, we've done less restorative projects, but we've seen an uptick. Besides implants remained, there was a 1 project difference between 2021 and 2022. But for the rest of these, they all saw an increase in the total number of projects, most notably clinical education. So I know it looks like it's the least number here, which it is, not by much, but we did actually 150 more projects this year or in 2022 than we did over 2021. The other notable mention here is digital dentistry. For 2021, it came in, I'll say 6 out of 6, and now it's moved up the ranks. So we're moving towards not only more clinical education, but more digital projects as well. Here are the hours associated to each of those product categories. So restorative accounted for the most hours year over year, and preventive had come in second. Anna's been keeping her verticals very busy. And then another way we are looking at these are the number of projects that we're completing by entity. This is showing really what we'd expect to see when we look at the sales related to each of these entities. Clinical education is actually grouped up into Glidewell Dental and Prismatic here with sales. So that's why they're the same teal color here. So roughly 80% of our projects make up 90% of the enterprise sales, followed by satellites. It's 13% of our projects, and then Crown World, and then Latin America. So those are all correlating nicely in terms of sales that each of those entities are bringing into the enterprise. So this graph, I updated it a little bit, hoping it would be easier to interpret. I'm not sure if fully accomplished that. So let me just explain this a little bit. Each of these bars here are the number of projects that we've completed per month. The blue, I guess, ocean mountain range back here is our headcount. And then here's our productivity, this line here. And the takeaway really from this graph is there's one outlier, time period, right? And it's right here, March of 2020. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. We had to decrease our headcount significantly, as did most areas. But the interesting thing that we saw was this huge uptick in productivity. So that tells us a couple of different things, and we can interpret that a couple of different ways. The main thing I want to say about that is when we have very clear direction, we have limited resources, and we know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, we're very focused and disciplined, we can get a lot done. More on that later. And then more on productivity and headcount. So from 2019 to 2022, we're tracking the projects we're completing per year, our employees per month, and then the average number of projects each person is completing per month. Uh, Post-COVID, we've managed to improve each of these metrics over year. Our project count overall has increased 8% year over year, at least from 2020, comparing from 2021 to 2022. Our FTEs are essentially equivalent, even though there's a slight uptick right there. Again, this is FTE equivalents, full-time equivalents. It's not headcount. It's not bodies. So if we're doing more overtime, technically we're having more FTEs. So that's why our headcount has decreased, but our FTEs have remained relatively the same. And then finally, our average projects completed per person per month. We finished off at 8.2, so each person in the department's completing about 8 projects per month, which was one of the goals we set out for the beginning of the year, which I'll review in the next slide. And then here, just reviewing our operational targets. I'll go over these briefly. Some of I've already mentioned throughout the presentation already. This was our 2021, where we ended at the end of the year. So we used that as a baseline to calculate our goals for last year. What we aimed to do was increase our first 3 metrics by 10%. And I'll kind of go over these individually. So projects per month, we wanted to get to average 468 projects per month. We just missed it, 460. December was a little bit light of a month with holidays and vacations. We weren't able to complete as much as we wanted to, but pretty close. Our headcount per month. So as we were finishing off 2021 very, very strongly, we anticipated being able to hire additional people to account for the growing demands for the marketing department. That's not ultimately what happened. We remained pretty much flat for the year. This says it's a negative, but we'll call it a wash. Projects headcount per month, we did meet our goal, so that ended up at 8.2 for the year. Our on-time delivery percentage, we just wanted to maintain or exceed the 95%, which we did. We ended up at 96%. And then I covered this one already, but direct revenue projects, 67% we ended up at for the end of the year. The rest of these here are still TBD as we're establishing labor hours. We're trying to get more compliant with that. And then also making sure we're accounting for all of those costs for the pieces of collateral as well to get better at the customer acquisition costs and ROI calculations. So overall, just some takeaways. We've increased our overall project volume. The number of projects we're able to complete per person has also gone up. We're completing more projects in the direct revenue category, also spending more time in those direct revenue projects. And then overall, our on-time percentage has remained above 95%. And then going quickly into some of our operational improvements, first of which is our marketing library. I've been talking about this for what seems like 2 years now, but we are at the final stages. We're working with our consultant implementation partner called RightPoint, and we're implementing closed user groups. Essentially, we're need to create a login page that will utilize SSO so that outside, anybody externally to Glidewell will not be able to access the portal and get a hold of our assets. So marketing library, if you're not aware what that is, it's going to basically be a centralized repository for all of our finalized marketing assets. So if customer service or production, shipping needs to see the latest RX book, the latest ad, where does this coupon go to? What are the last 5 things we put out for Dr. Patel, or whatever you want to search for as relates to things that are published in marketing, that's where you'll go to kind of find that. So once we get those closed user groups done, which should be finished QA testing at the end of February, hopefully before Q2 we'll be able to roll that out and get the get the SOPs created, implement any feedback from the beta group from our CSRs, and then conduct some training for users. The other thing that we want to work on this year, this is not just for Q1, this is just throughout the year, is a central marketing repository. So we're moving away from corporate connection, and more the departments are utilizing SharePoint as their department site to consolidate a lot of the things that they need. So we want to use that for centralizing any internal marketing SOPs or any outward facing references for employees as well. So there'll be links to the marketing library on there, any contact information if you have a question about something specific, who to reach out to, what our current priorities are for the quarter, for the year, making those visible to anybody who's interested. And then SOPs on, how to request things from marketing, and then internal SOPs for like onboarding and brand guides, and some boilerplate copy to hopefully expedite some of the writing process as well. And then operatory images, working with the clinical team, streamlining the workflow for clinical imagery. So that includes the taking of the pictures, the uploading of the assets, the metadata tagging, and then rolling into the approvals of the clinical imagery that marketing will use for promotional materials. And then also there's 2 places currently that all the operatory images are. They're in AEM and they're also in Box. So consolidating those two places so that all of the images for the clinical team are easy to access in one place. And then ongoing, as always, reporting enhancements. I mentioned already the customer acquisition costs and ROI, more compliance with logging labor hours and costs. So I'll be monitoring that more closely. And then also putting together more information for anybody, well, internal and external to marketing, in terms of how long things take, how much things cost, and what the scope of those would entail. So just putting together really kind of like a cheat sheet of working times for each of the different collateral types. And then ongoing workfront maintenance with reporting and templates and auditing, all of those types of things, plus 100 other things that didn't make it to the top 4. But anyway, thank you. Let me know if anybody has any questions, or if you guys want me to dive into any numbers, if you want me to send you guys anything. I have all of this. So I know I ran through it quickly, but thank you.